let me just take care of a few points of logistics for today. Um, I'm sure a lot of you have used Zoom and are plenty familiar with it, but know that you can talk to us as the panelist through the Q&A feature. The chat feature has been disabled with so many people attending, and the Q&A is the way that we will communicate to the presenter when he is on and you have a question for him. If you have a question for our speakers before that, representing CCSD, Dr. Scott Siegfried and Karen Fisher, or if you have just a general PIN question, feel free to put that in the Q&A and we'll get to as many of those as possible. Also, if you happen to know someone who was not able to attend this morning directly, please know that within 24 hours, so by tomorrow evening, potentially a little earlier, the recording of this presentation will be on the website and can be accessed at any time. Right now, we're only able to host 100 people total. So if you know that you're gonna be watching, please feel free to hop on as soon as you can and reserve yourself a spot. Otherwise, you can enjoy it at your own time after this presentation is live. So we will go ahead and start our September 1st. Welcome back to school. I'm Susu Duga. I am one of the PIN co-chairs. Shari Mendry is the other co-chair of PIN, and I'm also the programming chair. So with some of your input, I help find speakers to address the needs and concerns that you all have. Today, the way that PIN typically will work is that we'll have between 20 minutes to 25 minutes of information that's from the district. We call that our PSA time. At 9:45, we will start our presenter, and the presenter will go until 11:15, usually incorporating questions during that time. Some presenters will like to hold questions until the end. Thankfully, Craig is happy to have questions during his presentation, so you can jot those into the Q&A as they come up to you. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Scott Siegfried to give us a little shortened State of the Union address. Dr. Scott?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate being here, and it's always a pleasure to be with PIN, and so it's such a wonderful group and representation of our community and caring group, so thank you. State of the Union. So we've started now our third week of school. Kids are in school, whether they chose 100% online or in person. And so that is moving. And I want to just start by thanking our teachers, our staff for the great job they're doing, and just the wonderful outpouring of support they provided for kids and that our community has provided for them as we've kind of reimagined education amid this pandemic. So as you know, we spent really the end of spring, summer planning, working with lots of groups across the metro area inside of Cherry Creek to develop the best, most thoughtful plan for kids, and to also develop the safest plan possible for all of our adults and for our kids. And so that has been put in motion, and we're finding some success. I will tell you that so important that kids are able to see and be with other humans, to re-socialize, to have that chance to be with teachers in their classroom. When we think of social emotional learning, socialization, mental health, and then their learning, it's critical that we have this opportunity. So I was glad that we're able to follow and exceed all the health guidance to put this in place and make it work, and then to develop a data-based approach to decision making. And I found a lot of success with that in our community. And I would like to also share that that data-based approach is being adopted by the Metro Denver Partnership for Health for all Front Range school districts. And if you saw the information from the Colorado Department of Health and Environment, that's out for comment right now that is based in large part off what we developed as well, using data to really drive decisions, not only around schools, but also around places of worship, around bars, restaurants, everything that's out there. And I think that's a great way to go, because as we were moving through the summer, and I know my board president, Karen Fishner, and other colleagues, we were hearing a lot of information. And it was important for us that we really made decisions based on data and the facts, and not, what somebody saw on CNN or Fox News or what they thought was the truth. And so I believe that put us in a good position. Now, the reality is that we continue to live with COVID. And that was something we knew was the case and would continue to be the case. And so many of you listening that I'm not able to see, but hopefully you can see me at least, that some of you have received letters at your schools. And because there continue to be cases of COVID in our community, and that's a reality, and we knew that coming in, it was putting in place those multiple overlapping safety strategies to make sure that we weren't spreading COVID, because as it remains in our community. And what I can tell you to date is we are seeing no spread in schools. Now, there are people in the community that have COVID that are coming to school. And we knew that was the case because a lot of times they don't know. Kids don't know. And in fact, out of the first 6,000 staff members that we tested, we had 9 positives. Of those, 5 people had no idea they had it as adults. The other 4 had already quarantined because they had been in close contact with somebody that knew they had it. And so we were able to keep all those 9 people out, but it continues to be there, but it's not spreading in the schools. And I get that the letters that are coming out, they cause questions, they cause concerns, and we will, as I said in my Friday letter, stand up a site on our webpage where people can go and see in full transparency all of the letters that we've sent to every single school, regardless of whether there's an impact or not. And we'll also total up for you that, the number of kids that are currently learning by remote because they were quarantined, or because operationally we weren't able to support their continued learning with the quarantine in that school. And so there's a number of schools right now where there are classrooms of kids that have been transitioned to remote for 14 days and then will transition back. And that's the reality that we knew we would live with and we knew we would plan. I also tell you, and I'll emphasize the letter that I sent out Friday, a few of the items in there, that first, we stood up a team. Right now it's 6 full-time members that their job every day is to contact trace and to make good recommendations based on health guidance. So I have 2 full-time registered nurses that are trained contact tracers by Tri-County Health, a full-time communication staff, a full-time EOP, and a member of our teachers union sits at that table in that room to serve as that check and balance for us. Because it's important that we always do the right thing first. And that's their role, is to ensure and to be able to communicate to other staff that the process is legitimate, and it is. And the last person I added yesterday is a data specialist, somebody that can take the data we're creating and identifying and then present that to the public in a meaningful way. And then I've also been invited into conversations with the governor's office, CDPHE, and the Metro Denver Partnership for Health to present back our data. And that first presentation will be tomorrow, to help further evolve guidance. Because right now there's contradictory language in CDPHE guidance around quarantining, where they talk about close contact as being within 6 feet of somebody for 15 minutes. But at the same time, if there's a positive person in a classroom, the whole class has to be quarantined. And those 2 pieces aren't the same. And so we want to help them get to consistent language so that across the metro area, we all have the same language, the same approach, and are acting with fidelity in relation to that. Now, the last piece I'll address before we kind of move on is, I talked about a little bit in that letter around, please, if anybody in your family has symptoms, please keep everybody home. That is turning out to be the biggest struggle we're having, is that right now I get it's allergy season. I get that there's colds going around too, and they may or may not be COVID. And in fact, in most cases, because our positivity rate is so low, they're not COVID. But please, for the sake of your class, for the sake of your classmates, for the sake of your grade and your school, stay home until they resolve. And right now it's really that everybody acting for the greater good. And the second part that I put out there, and I did overstep health guidance, state health guidance, is asking people that if you travel out of state, or if your kid goes to an overnight camp, that you take time to make sure that you're not bringing anything back. And if it's a 14-day quarantine, fine. If it's get a test and know that you're negative before you come back into a classroom or into the school, great. Please do those things, because again, we're finding that it is not spreading in school, it's just being brought to school. And then the impact of that one individual can put out hundreds of students. And I know that nobody's intending for that, but that's the result. And so if over Labor Day, you plan to travel as a family, and the same 4, 5, 6, 8 of you are as a family that live together every day are going camping together, that makes sense. Come back to school, because you're not exposing yourself to other people. If you're going to an overnight camp out of state and your child is going there by themselves to have that experience, great experience. But please, when they come back, don't send them right back into school without knowing that they're not bringing anything back. And so we're going to put out some additional kind of thinking around Labor Day by the end of the day today, so people can have a little more guidance. I have also, on behalf of our community and with the support of the board, have access to a number of COVID tests. So if there's families out there that through their provider or any other means are not able to find a test, we have kid tests available. And so if that will help a student come back to school sooner, just contact us and we'll make sure we get you set up with one of those. We want to make sure everybody's in school as much as they can, but we also want to make sure you're not bringing anything that we don't want you to bring with you to school when you come back. And so it continues to be an evolving conversation. The science evolves, the approach evolves. We are learning. We're getting better every single day that we work on this. But ultimately, what I can tell you is I've walked around schools and just peeking my head in classrooms, because I'm not going in and breaking cohorts, but peeking my head in, I see a lot of smiling faces under those masks. And kids are happy. They're enjoying. They love being back, and their teachers do too. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's not scared and people aren't worried. They are. But they're where they want to be ultimately in their hearts. And then our online school, 11,000 students signed up for 100% online. And in 3 weeks, we transferred 500 teachers, hired new teachers, and identified curriculum and set that up. And that has been an unbelievable lift. So I want to publicly thank our staff, our principal, Christy Hart, for the work she did for our online kids. And they're also having a great experience. So I'd also tell you that online is not the same as being in person. Class size isn't the same. Synchronous learning isn't the same. It is a different approach purposely. But we continue to hire teachers today actively for online, so we continue to reduce class size and give more opportunity to be synchronous. And for the parents and kids that are there, please remember, we're in our second full week of school, third week of school. It's a long year ahead of us. And we continue to hire teachers to bring you more, again, smaller class sizes and more synchronous times. And we are actively doing that today. So that will get to a place where there's a little better ratio. And last, I guess, in the transition to Mrs. Fisher, I would say that, of course, you can't just have one crisis at a time. And so while we're dealing with the pandemic of COVID has impacted state budgets, national budgets in an extraordinarily difficult way. The state lost $3.2 billion in their budget this year. They expect a bigger cut next year, and I believe that will be the case, because we are not fully open and people are not fully out spending and buying. The cut to us this year was $25 million, and the cut next year we expect to be nearly $30 million. $60 million in cuts to this organization would be absolutely devastating. When COVID is over and we come back in August of 2021, it would not look like what you moved here for. And so we are working in every single way to stop that from happening. The first way is centrally, we have identified $14.3 million in cuts. And those are real people and real programs. Those are coaches and coordinators that work with staff to make them the best teachers they can be for all your kids. But there's a long held belief, and I believe it too in Cherry Creek, that the first cuts are away, farthest away possible from the classroom. And so that's why we will cut $14.3 million centrally. We are starting that now. But again, those are real people with real consequences. But then that leaves a lot of money left to cut. And our hope is to find other ways to kind of support that. And one is our Board of Education having the courage to call for an election during this difficult time of a 4A and 4B, a bond and budget election. And with that, I'll kind of transition to Mrs. Fisher to let her talk about the specifics of that and how that helps us to offset what would be devastating cuts, even in this day and age. So Mrs. Fisher.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everybody. So first, before I talk about the election, I just want to share a fun story. I have a really close friend who's a teacher. She's my age, and she's been a teacher in our district for 30 years or so. And she shared that how excited she is to be back. She says it's the longest that she'd been out of school since she was 4 years old. So think about that. And you can see that she really, you can see why she said she missed it. It's just a part of her life. And she is thrilled, absolutely thrilled to be back. So thank you, Scott, and to all of your team for making that happen. So you all know, you all are leaders and involved parents, and we so appreciate the PIN group. You know that Cherry Creek Schools is known for its excellence, our excellent teachers, excellent nurses, excellent mental health support in every school. And when Scott talked about the funding challenges, particularly because of COVID, but always we've had chronic underfunding from the state, and it's only gotten worse this year. I want to let you know that that excellence is really at stake. So when the district came to my colleagues and me on the Board of Ed and asked us to consider calling an election this November, we put it off for several months because we were in the middle of this pandemic. We knew we needed to really make sure that that we had to do it this year. We know that there are challenging times for families across our district, and we're really, really well aware of that. But we also felt that it wasn't right for us to not give our voters the opportunity to approve this. If we don't even ask our voters, then it's up to my colleagues and me to make devastating cuts, which means jobs for people like my teacher friend and others across the district. So I really want to direct you to the campaign website. I'm not going to go into too many details about the campaign. I know you guys have a terrific speaker lined up, but we have a volunteer grassroots committee that is made up of people from every single school across the district. And that's pretty important. And I'm going to say that again, every single school, charter schools, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, every single school across the building has teams of at least 3 people, including the building principal and a parent and a teacher. So several of those schools sent 2 teachers and or 2 parents. So everybody is represented on this grassroots committee, and that committee is called Citizens for Cherry Creek Schools. The website is citizensforcherrycreekschools.com. It will tell you exactly where we will spend the money when our voters pass this election. In a nutshell, we need 4A, which is a mill levy increase, to maintain our excellent teachers and our excellent nurses. And we need 4B, which is approval to issue bonds to do lots of renovations across the district, but to really, really shore up safety and mental health in the district. So in a nutshell, if you just have one little soundbite, it's 4A for teachers and nurses and 4B for mental health and safety. And you can find more on that website. What time is it? Like I said, I didn't want to take up too much of your time. But if you would go to that website, citizensforcherrycreekschools.com, and ask your principal how you can help. Principals are allowed to answer factual questions. We will have yard signs and other materials later as we get closer to when the ballots will be mailed. I mentioned that we took a little bit of extra time before we decided to bring this to the voters this fall, and we lowered the amount of the bond so that we could keep the cost to taxpayers as low as possible. And some people will ask you what the cost is if you can help us spread the message that this election will be on the ballot. And the answer to that is it's $1.65 a month per $100,000 of home value. The average priced home in Cherry Creek Schools is a little over $400,000. So that adds up to less than $100 a year. But again, all of that information is on the website. So I don't think I have anything else. unless any of the panelists have questions for me.
If anybody has a question for either Scott or Karen, you can type it into the Q&A and we will bring that to their attention.
Thanks, Susu. There's also a place to submit questions via the website, via the Citizens for Cherry Creek Schools website. So thanks again.
If y'all can stay available for the next 5 minutes, we'll see if there's any questions. I would just like to thank all that the Board of Education and Dr. Scott has done, how they have sacrificed their summers, how their families have sacrificed enjoying having them, because imagine as difficult as it was for each of us with uncertainties going on. There were massive decisions to be made and decisions that required a lot of action and creative action. So I know you can all join me in being very grateful for the conscientious and very deliberate work that y'all have put into getting our kids back into school, getting our teachers in situations where they feel safe and they feel that they're also cared for. I've got 2 sisters who are in education in different parts of the country, and I sent them the presentation that Dr. Siegfried had put together, showing how it was based so much on data and not just on, well, this school is doing this or the university is doing this, but it was something that could be replicated in different states and communities. So I appreciate that we are a driving force and leader, as shown by the conversations that you're going to continue to have in the state. So thank you for your leadership and for your vision and your sacrifice, especially. Right now, I am not seeing any questions for you guys. So I think you are off the hook and you're good to go. So again, if you need, if you think of something for either of these folks, feel free to reach out on the regular Cherry Creek website and the Citizens for Cherry Creek Schools, plural.com. And you can get more information and you can help inform your neighbors and your friends and your family about the need for the 4A and the 4B in the fall when that comes to a vote. Right now we're going to switch gears. So if you need to, if we were live and in person, I would be making you stand up and stretch and talk to your neighbor, and all of us behind the scenes are going to be doing a little bit of that too. So fill up your teacup or your water bottle and get ready for some exciting information. Today, you know what, I'll give you a minute if anybody needs a potty break or you need to check in on your kids who might be doing some online schooling. We will come back in about 2 minutes. Be prepared to take some notes, be prepared to do some thinking and some creative learning. And we will see you in 2 minutes. All righty. Let's get back into this, because I know you guys, you're our PIN community who just loves to learn and loves to keep growing your family and developing new skills that can really change the way your family goes forward. And right now, we all need to develop some new skills. And it's really great that our kids can see us doing that on their behalf and on our general family's behalf. So thank you for being here. Let your kids know that that you're still learning. They'll be pretty excited, and they might be a little curious of why. So good time to have a brain conversation. We're going to learn more about the brain. Just a fascinating thing that we all have. So today, you are treated to the wisdom and the years of experience from Craig Knippenberg. He is a family therapist in the Denver area for the last 40 years, and he has written a pretty amazing book called Wired and Connected. The subtitle being Brain-Based Solutions to Ensure Your Child's Social and Emotional Success. If you look on the PIN website or on that flyer that you received, you can click onto the link and you can get a discount if you choose to purchase this book. This is really a fabulous resource. Just as a tickler, overwhelmed, knowing how to respond to your child's emotions, impulsive behavior, or lack of empathy? Anybody have had any of those issues in the last 5.5 months? You don't need to be stressed anymore. So in Wired and Connected, you will discover the various stages of brain development and how they affect your child, the difference between girls' and boys' brains, practical tips for working with your child's ever-changing brain, and some proven strategies for raising healthy kids and keeping you sane at the same time. So I am going to let Craig take it away, and he will remind you that whenever you have a question about something, just like we do when we're meeting in person in PIN, feel free to jot it down on the Q&A, and I or one of the other PIN boards behind the scenes will bring that to our attention, and we will ask Craig your question. We'll try and get to as many as possible. So, Craig, it is all yours.
Thank you very much, Suzu, and thank you to everyone and for having me on. I was sitting here looking out my window at this beautiful fall day here in Colorado, and I thought of the old Rocky Mountain News title, "'Tis a privilege to live in Colorado, and 'tis a privilege to be back with PIN again." The last time I was shared with PIN was in 2011, and the topic was families distracted. And the whole new thing was all the text messaging going on. Everybody was texting, the teens, the parents at the dinner table. And I looked back on my notes from that and I thought, well, you know, that genie got out of the bottle and hasn't come back. So we're still dealing with that. And this is a two-part series. Today, we're going to be talking about the social brain. Then next Tuesday, we're going to do, and it's for the whole family, we're going to look at how electronics and social media, gaming and social media impact the brain, impact your child's brain. And we'll have a virtual role play that we're putting together since I can't be there with your kids to do it in person. But all the families invited to watch, and I think your kids will enjoy learning as well. So this would be a two-parter. Today's is based on the book. The book is based on I've been at St. Anne's Episcopal School as the mental health consultant for the past 25 years now. It's one of the independent schools. And I developed this brain-based curriculum to teach K through 8. And the book is based on that. It's also based on 35 years of running social and emotional development groups. We've been doing it for 40. I finally stopped about 5 years ago because I wanted to work on the book, but 40 years of group experience, individual and family experience. And then the pandemic. So I'm going to weave in to this talk. This is the first one I've had since last, I think it was March 10th was my last seminar. and then it all shut down. So I'll weave in the pandemic. I've been doing a Facebook Live program since the very first week of it, and have written in journals, magazines, newspapers all over the country with different tips and ideas on family life during this time. We're going to be moving pretty fast. My technical assistant, Sydney, who does all my IT for the shows, and we're going to be switching into a podcast soon, will be flipping slides for me. And if I might have her do some facial expressions for me too, since I can't see the audience. But we will be moving pretty fast, and we'll crank it along. And just a couple final thoughts about me. I told you about what the book's based on. I've been doing this for almost 40 years now. I have been a parent, a grandparent, or am a parent, a grandparent, a step-parent. I was a single parent for a long time. I think I mentioned grandparents. So have lots of in-person experiences, and we've still got one at home, a freshman in high school who unfortunately, I'm an adoptive parent as well. Unfortunately, she's not starting in school. And I think one of the great things for you at Cherry Creek is getting to start in school. And unfortunately for my daughter in DPS, it doesn't look like that's going to happen for a couple of months. But I think that really what it tells us, this pandemic has really shown. And it's basically the title of the book is that kids, your kids, are wired to connect. They want to be with other kids. They want to be with their teachers. They want to be with their friends. Of course, they want to be with you too, but they want all those other connections, and their brains just crave it, naturally crave it. And they've really been struggling throughout this process. And Scott pegged it when he was talking about, Cherry Creek Schools with social and emotional growth. I can't support enough what Karen talked about, mental health, funding for mental health. That is critical in our schools throughout our country. Would totally support that. But he also mentioned kids are happy. Now, I got a little glimpse of it this summer. We do our group programs in the spring. Those had to switch to an online platform, of course. So we were doing them online. And my wife and the colleagues did a great job coming up with different games and activities to teach skills. But the best part was this summer when we got to do some in-person groups again. And I stopped by the very first day for one of my wife's groups, and just to see all the kids there playing and with distancing, of course, but just having a great time being together. And then this past Wednesday, I was able to be at St. Anne's for the first morning of school, the first day of the school year. And it was just like any other first day of the year. The kids came in their new school outfits and their lunches and, the cutest socks you've ever seen, plus the most widest variety of masks I've ever seen in my life. I think that is the new thing, is who's got the cool mask. But the kids just were smiling with their eyes, which, by the way, is called a smize. I guess Tyra Banks invented that. They were absolutely, you could see their eyes, you could see their smiles in their eyes. It was just so delightful to see them back. One of our middle schoolers wrote on the chalkboard, the dry erase board in the middle school hallway, every day we are in school is a gift. And so I'm excited for your kids being able to be in school. And I got to tell you, it was just amazing. I'm going to give you a quick tip too. On that first morning, I had to zoom into the cohorts. We have 37 of them, 38 of them. And I zoomed in with the kids and their classes and their cohorts. And I talked about smizing, and then I talked about you can really understand a lot of nonverbal communication, and that's one of the area of brains we're going to look at today, the third area. You can understand a lot from people just by looking at their eyes and the bridge of their nose. So I'll take my glasses off. I brought my mask. This is my favorite CU mask, and I showed the kids that I can show lots of different feelings. And then I practiced smiling with my eyes, and then I did this one. And I asked the kids, what does that mean? And they all screamed out, you're angry. I'm like, you can learn a lot. And in fact, it's the evolution. We'll talk about evolution today. The Neanderthals had this hard, bony structure up here in their forehead. And their eyebrows were stuck. They weren't flexible. And one of the greatest things for modern humans is we have flexible eyebrows. And we can communicate with our eyebrows. And there's a test you can take of looking at pictures of eyes and eyebrows, and you determine what the person is feeling. So this is a great time to teach your kids about others' feelings just with masks. So if you've got younger ones, I'd practice with them, have some fun, just do different faces, have them make faces for you. If you got teenagers, you definitely need to talk to them about, you know, the best romance starts in the eyes. It's all looking at each other in the eyes. And that's a great skill for your teens to learn. And of course, along with all the smiles, we, on the very first morning, a half hour into, 20 minutes into the kids coming into campus, the kids horse around. That's what they want to do. They haven't seen their buddies. They want to horse around. At St. Anne's, we had these hand wash stations they put on carts. It's the wildest thing. It's got a pump, and you step on a little pedal, so it's touchless. You step on a pedal and the water comes out, and you wash your hands. And sure enough, there's 3 third-grade boys just laughing hysterically as they're stepping on that pedal. The water's gushing out, and all of a sudden there's no more water left for the other students. And I'm like, gentlemen, this is not a play to it. It's to keep us all safe. But kids are always going to horse around, and they find ways to do that, even during a pandemic. So Sydney, if you'll click up the slides, here's, I'm not able to see it on my screen. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Thank you. So our title page, Wired and Connected, Your Unique Child's Social Brain. We'll talk about that in a second. Go ahead, Sydney. And then Zuzu mentioned this. We do have it on sale, $5 discount. You can get it for 15 bucks with PIN code PIN 2020. If you're not sure you're ready to buy, you can scan this QR code, I think it's called. I'm not very good at these. You can scan it. You can get the first 3 chapters for free and then see if you want to buy it. I will tell you, this book is for K through 6th. I want to do the 7th through high school and young adult brain, but I had to cut it off because the book would have been 1,000 pages. But the basics of the brain that we're going to talk about, whether any age child you have, even if you've got a 27-year-old like I do, it's going to be the same parts of the brain. And I will explain the teen brain today and how that changes and the differences that are involved with the teen brain. Next slide, please. So some quick underlying thoughts to our talk today will be coming from a social brain perspective, and it's really 3 areas of the brain we're going to look at. It's based on evolutionary biology and psychology. And basically what that means in this situation is your kids, you and I and your kids, have ancient brains. They've been evolving and developing for a very, very long time. And the world we live in, our culture, has just rapidly evolved, especially in areas of technology. So we have this ancient brain living in a new world, and that definitely has some consequences, and many of those we'll talk about a little bit today and then next week. All of this is based on your child, any child, having an adequate environment. By that I mean enough food, shelter, safety, a good school to attend, health care. Their basic needs are met. You don't have to be a super deluxe family, a wealthy family. It just has to be a good enough environment. And so that's what we're looking at for kids that have a good enough environment. It's the kids who don't that then this is going to dramatically impact their trajectory and what would be their normal their outcome. We'll also be talking about neurotypical brains. So that's just your average kid's brain. However, I will talk about the basis for ADHD, mood regulation disorders, and autism spectrum disorder. So I'll weave that in as we're talking in case you have an exceptional child. And we have that at my house. Boys' brains, girls' brains. On this, I'm talking about chromosomes. So this is not about gender. This is about chromosomes. So two X chromosomes for females and an X and Y chromosome for males. And that's strictly what we're talking about, not in terms of how gender is expressed in our culture, but just the brains on a chromosomal level. Next part, this is probably one of the most important, is as a parent, you are a shepherd. You are not an engineer. The last 30, 40 years of parenting books have told parents all these different things that you should be doing and how you can change the trajectory, the outcome of your child. And you can't. You just have to be good enough. If you have an adequate environment, you're a good enough parent, your kid is genetically going to be who they're going to be. There's absolutely no research that you can engineer a super child. It doesn't exist. So the analogy is you're a shepherd. You're a shepherd of these sheep. And what you're trying to do is your first job is to keep them alive. And so you're finding greener pastures, you're protecting them, you're keeping them away from the big predators, the wolf, right? Now, unfortunately with COVID is one of those big predators. And unfortunately, rather than just allowing our sheep to mosey through pastures, we'll talk about free play later, we've had to become much more overprotective. Just the whole mask thing and not touching and not roughhousing the way kids want to, it really has caused us to have to more micromanage than I ever would have wanted for any kind of parenting situation. But we've had to do that because of that. But I want you to remember, you're a shepherd. But the only thing, and a podcast on Freakonomics talked about, they looked at all sorts of variables, and they wanted to know what's one thing parents could pass on to their children in life that isn't genetically related, or it's just they would pick up on it if you did this. And the one thing they found was kindness, that if you as a parent are kind, you're kind to the people that take the wait on you at restaurants, or that are your grocery workers, or your mail person, that will get passed on to your kids. Kids will pick that up from you. And that was the only one they came up with, and I'm thankful for that one. Now, one other point on this, every book you hear, anytime you talk to a therapist or psychologist, they'll talk to you about how parental consistency is important for child behavior. You have to be consistent. Now, that is true. So I want to just, the number one cause of child behavior problems. Now, this is outside of things like ADHD. If you have neurotypical kids, number one cause of behavior problems is parental inconsistency. So saying there's going to be rules, but then you don't follow the rules, and you change the rules, or they don't apply. Now, what I would tell you, when you hear that, you could feel this tremendous guilt and be thinking, oh my gosh, I have to be 100% consistent. You don't. Before the pandemic, I've always told parents, shoot for 80%. You just need a B. So let's say the rule at your house is you have to pick any of your clothes up, your shoes from the family room, and when you retire for the evening, you got to pick up your stuff. That's a family standard rule. Now, if you say that rule and you're going to say, hey, we'll interrupt whatever you're doing, you'll have to come pick it up right away, then you're going to reinforce that. And I would tell you 80% of the time. And the reason is there's going to be 20% of the time where you're just too tired. And you know that your teenager's in there, they're gaming or something, it's late at night, you're just whooped. And you know you're supposed to knock on your kid's door and say, hey, you left your tennis shoes, get out here and get them right now. But you're just not up for the battle. You know it's going to be an argument, you're tired, you want to go to bed. And I would tell you in those situations, just pick it up, throw them by the door, and go to bed. No parent can be 100% consistent. If you try to be, you'll really push yourself over the edge, and you'll push your kids over the edge too. So it's just shooting for 80%. Now with the pandemic, the first thing I said in my first podcast, and I wrote a piece for the Washington Post on 12 suggestions. And I said, we're supposed to be consistent, but right now during the pandemic, I want you to shoot for 60%. Just get a D. 61% is fine, because you're going to be together all the time. You're going to try to set up structure. You're going to try to have rules, but it's going to be tough. And then I said, unless you have preschoolers or you have teenagers. So let's shoot for 61%. If you have preschoolers or teenagers, we're just going for 51%. If you can be consistent 51% of the time during this pandemic, you'll be just fine. And I think that's a good number to shoot for. So I'm officially, if I have a magic pen, I'm going to wave away any parental guilt you felt over the last 6 months. And I know it's out there. Things you wish you would have done different, or you would have spent more time with this, or done this, or you should have done that. Get rid of your parental guilt. And the other thing I would tell you, this has become so trendy on social media the last couple of years, and it just puts me over the edge. There should be no parent shaming. The one thing that this pandemic has taught all of us is that we're all fragile. We can all be pretty inadequate. We all are broken, and we're trying the best we can. And to shame other parents for what they're doing or not doing, it's mind-boggling to me. And it's something we need to get rid of. We do have laws. If a parent's behavior is below legal standards, yes, then they need to be held accountable legally. We can't abuse children or neglect children. But some of the stuff you see online of shaming parents is just too much, and that needs to end. So wave away your guilt and any shame you feel, because it's tough. Finally, differentiated parenting. Your kids are all different. If you have more than one child, you realize that. Even if you have one child, you might realize, oh, they're more like their dad, or they're more like their mom, and they're not like me. They really do things differently than I do. And so each child needs a different approach. And in my book, I end up with 3 slides, the child support system, that looks at 24 different brain configurations and how to meet the needs of each of those kids. And that's what we want, is differentiated parenting. And that's no different than differentiated education. Now, finally, I'm going to give you a quick neurology lesson with some brain basics. So Sydney will click the slide. By the time you're an adult, well, 26, 28 for females, 28 for males, 26 for females, your brain is going to have all its neurons in there, and they'll have 100 billion brain cells, or 100 billion neurons. Now, your baby was born with 200 billion neurons, way more than they would ever use. And during those early years, the brain trims out different neurons that it determines it doesn't need for the environment you're in. So a lot of the brain develops in relationship to the environment. If the brain feels like, hey, I don't need those, I can trim those out. So a fun, well, not necessarily fun, but because it's difficult, but when you look at infants who are born in say, a war zone, they're going to have much higher reactivity systems and higher cortisol levels than babies who aren't. So being in difficult, stressful environments will turn more of that reactivity system on in an infant's brain. A peaceful, loving environment will turn that off. But basically, it's 200 billion. If you've got a 4th or 5th grader right now, they're at about 80 billion. Trims it down to about there. And then finally, the last 20 billion is really going to happen after puberty, and primarily in this front part of the brain that we'll be talking about first. And on the next slide, in addition to 100 billion brain cells, each brain cell is capable of connecting to 7,000 other neurons. So it is an amazing superhighway of connections. I do believe that's more connections than Verizon has. 100 billion times 7,000, just incredible potential. And the brain can change and morph, and after brain injuries, it can do things different. It's pretty incredible what it can do. Finally, the speed of the brain really increases. Your elementary child's brain, your preschooler's brain, the neurochemicals that go from one brain cell to the next travel at about 2 miles an hour for your preschooler. That increases up until age 35. So as some of you younger parents, you're still getting faster, up to age 35. And by 35, your brain will fire at 200 miles an hour. So it goes from the speed of a giant tortoise to the speed of an Indy car. It gets tremendously fast. It doesn't just automatically decline after 35. It does hold for a while. As you get older, you do find that things take a little bit longer sometimes. You get a few more gray hairs and you can be forgetful. But it will keep going, and it gets up to 200 miles an hour. Now, on our next slide, we're going to start into the 3 brain areas. The first one is what I like to call your president. So the 3 terms I'll talk to you about today are terms that I developed with students to help them learn about the brain. The fancy name for it is the prefrontal cortex, or the frontal lobe is the formal name of it. If you want to read a great story, it's in my book. You can also look it up. It's the story of Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker who had a tremendous president. He was in this awful railroad accident, and he lost his president, just blew it right out of his head, and he survived, he lived. But what they noticed about him was the change in his behavior and his ability to control himself. He went from being this sophisticated gentleman to being just this sort of Neanderthal after the accident. And that's the first time medical science began to understand what the prefrontal cortex, or the frontal lobe, does for us. It is the last part of the brain to develop in your child. It was also the last part of the brain, evolutionary wise, to develop. And one of the things that separates humans from other species is we have a very robust president. We can do all sorts of stuff, all sorts of advanced planning. Now, if you look here on the left side of the picture, there's the top four, what we call executive functions. And you've probably heard that term from your teacher, or it's in the curriculum. But these are called the executive functions, or what I'd say the first four of the functions of the president. And these are in the upper part of the brain, so in the upper part of the frontal lobe. There's two parts to it, the upper part and then the lower. So attention is the ability to pay attention. So obviously during this talk today, so if right now you heard the dog barking, or your kid doesn't appear to be online school like they're supposed to be, you might get distracted. And then you have to get yourself back to paying attention, although you might need to go talk to your teenager, but also being able to get back to attention. So it's avoiding distractions. It's also being able to switch from one subject to the next, or switch from, okay, I'm attending to this right now, but now I have to attend to that. It's the ability to do that. And some people can do that with ease and just go from one thing to the next. Other people, they get a little discombobulated, a little harder for them. Some children you'll see in the classroom are paying great attention, they're listening, and others who are off task or having a tough time getting started. And then when they switch subjects, it takes them a long time to get readjusted. It's also a sense of organization. Obviously, that's putting things away. So if you go to any school kid's desk and you looked in the desk, some of the children have their pencils lined up in front, and they might have one little origami fidget there, and their books are all stacked up in the order that they'll be used with the notebooks. You look at other desks and it literally looks like a bomb went off. There's no system of organization. It's just stuffed. Now those tend to be the ADHD people. And I heard a lecturer once say, yeah, ADHD people have an organization system. It's called stuffing and piling. They just pile the stuff up and stuff it somewhere. And there's a lot of desks in school that sort of look like that. It's also being able to catch on to organizational systems. So one is children can organize themselves. They can figure out how they want to do their desk. Right? They can figure out a little system that they have for themselves. I have a system for my keys and my wallet and my watch, and back in the day before my cell phone. I've had that same system for 40 years. It works great. It's also being able to pick up on other people's systems. So if you think about going to the airport at TSA, there's definitely an organization system at TSA that you need to understand and you need to pick up on it. If not, you're going to be standing there trying to get bracelets off and your shoes off and the cell phone or your computer buried in the luggage and the 4-ounce bottle of liquid that you actually put in your travel bag right there in front of the scanners. And everybody's pissed because you're not following the system. For my teen daughter right now, starting freshman year, she's had a pretty quick and abrupt lesson on a syllabus. And I'm like, honey, a syllabus is just an organizational plan. It's the teacher telling you, here's how it works. And you really need to understand that. That's a really important one. Working memory is when you have thoughts that you need to just hold on for a couple seconds. You don't need it very long. You just, until you've done it. So if you're in spelling class, we'll just do this as an example, and the teacher says, okay, kids, let's put away our spelling books. I want you to get out a pencil in your math book, and I want you to turn to page 3, and we're going to pick up with problem number 6. Okay? Now, if you were in the audience right now, I would be asking you, after you put away your spelling book, hopefully, and got out your math and your pencil, I would ask someone, what page and number did I say? So I want you to see if you can recall that it was page number 3, starting with question number 6. That's working memory. Once the student has turned to page 3 and number 6, that memory is gone. You don't need to remember that. Nobody's going to ask you 20 years from now on September 1st, what page and number did that guy say in that podcast? It's just gone. You've accomplished it. You don't need it any longer. It's no different than when you're reading a newspaper and it has a jump page and it says stories continued on 11A. Once you've gotten to 11A and you pick up on the story again, you don't need to remember that anymore. Now, I will tell you, as you get older, for myself, there's sometimes when I'm reading a story, it says go to 11A, and I take a drink of coffee or I pet the dog, And then I start to turn and I'm like, oh, I forgot what page it was. And I have to go back to the front of the article to figure out where the jump page was. And then the fourth one, time management. This is critical for your high school students, your middle school students, especially during finals and exams. It's how well can you perceive time passing? So in part, it is being able to read a clock. That's part of it. But the main part is how well can you estimate about how much time do I have? So let's say the school bus is coming and it's supposed to be there at 8:35 and it's 8:30 and hopefully your child is thinking, well, mom said 5 minutes, so I need to get my socks on and my shoes and I need to grab my backpack upstairs. And hopefully, if it was only 5 minutes, your child would think, I need to hustle. I need to kind of move it here. But you might have the child who doesn't do well with time management, and you're screaming from the buses coming, and you find them on the stairs, going upstairs, and they're sitting there with no shoes and socks on, and they're playing with Legos. And the kid's like, well, I haven't found these in years. I didn't even know they were here. And they have no perception of time, constantly running late. And so it's that ability to say, how long is this taking? How long will it take? How much time do I have? If you're taking a test and the teacher says we got 10 minutes left, students, on that test, you got to figure out pretty quick, where are you on this test? How many questions have you done? What's left? And how to manage your time. And some children are going to do that well. Others are going to struggle with time management. I did learn from Sydney. She wrote a piece that apparently they're teaching time management quite a bit less than they used to in schools. They're not really teaching kids how to perceive time. I do an exercise with my fourth graders at St. Anne's where every year I have them estimate different things like a math sheet, reading a chapter in a book. The most fun is I say, like, in a couple minutes, I'm going to have you leave your seat and you're going to run to the far end of the field, touch a basketball pole, and come back. And I want you to write down first, how long do you think that will take you? And then I time them, and we time them to see, could they estimate how long it would take them to run down and back. And some kids can do it pretty well. Others will be off by 50%. I will tell you, for ADHD adults on testing, when they do time management with them, they're off by 50%. It's really hard for them. So those are the four main executive functions up in this higher level. Movement control is in the back part of the president, right between this sort of orangish area and I guess the bluish area. It's just right on the motor strip, and that's where movement control is. You know, most of your preschoolers are pretty active. They're moving around all the time, fidgeting. I go to any kindergarten classroom and you'll see them fidgeting around. But as they get older, they should be able to sit still for longer periods of time. My father was one of those people who his entire life, he could not sit still. He was always the Tigger, always had to move. Fortunately, he was able to learn how to move in a way that didn't disturb others. And it looks like we have a question. Let me finish this last one on impulse control, and we can take a question. The impulse control section of the brain, that's the lower part in the frontal lobe. That's one right below the executive function area. So it's about right here. And that's your ability to stop yourself when you have an impulse of some kind. It could be some stimulus that came in, a thought that came in, an emotion. A lot of them are emotionally based. So if you want to read a great book to younger children about a character with no impulse control, read David Goes to School by David Shannon. The kids love it, the first and second graders, and you can see a child who struggles controlling their impulses. And it's things like cutting in line, grabbing things. One friend of mine had a 6-year-old who they decided to do homeschooling, and he said, you know, she is so touch-oriented and she doesn't have good impulse control, and I can't in good knowledge send her to school because she won't be able to control herself from touching. And that was the reason they decided to go with homeschool. But it's being able to control those things on a more biological level. The funniest example would be, you know, you're a bunch of fourth graders working silent, doing silent work when one of the children passes gas. Now, kids with good impulse control are maybe gonna just ignore it totally, and they stay focused, they ignore the distraction, they continue to work. There's a few others that might, you know, do this with a little smirk and kind of, oh, that's funny. But then they think, I don't want to hurt my friend's feelings. I'm not going to laugh out loud. That wouldn't be appropriate. The teacher would be upset. Then probably half of them are going to laugh out loud a little bit, and they can't quite control it. And there's always then 5% of the kids or so who just cannot stop laughing and are just like ready to roll on the floor. And then the teacher has to reprimand them and they get in a little trouble because they couldn't control that laughter. But let's pause there and take a question. Zuzu, are you going to ask it for me?
Yes, we have a question that Julie wrote in. My 15-year-old daughter loses all time management skills while on the Xbox. What can I do to help her adjust and realize this gap?
Okay.
This might be something you deal with next Tuesday.
It is, and we'll touch on it today. So we're going to, in about 3 slides, Julie, we'll talk about that. Let me make a note on my actual slide, because that is a huge one for everybody on the electronics. But let me just write a note, Julie, and time with her daughter. So we will talk about it in about 3 slides. Thank you, Julie. You're jumping ahead, but it's right on track. Now, finally, in particular to the president, the female brain is on average 1 to 2 years ahead in brain development over boys by preschool. They're about a week to 2 weeks apart at birth. So if you look at the brain of a newborn, male and female, females are about 2 weeks ahead. That continues to grow up to preschool, and you see a 1.5 to 2 year difference in brain development, particularly in the president. It will happen again at puberty. So girls on average go through puberty sooner. I'll talk about the changes in the frontal lobe shortly in puberty, and they're about 1.5 to 2 years. So when I'm teaching a kindergarten classroom, most of the girls, when I'm in person, obviously not this year yet, most of the girls are sitting crisscross applesauce. They have spoons in the bowl. They're not wearing these cute little outfits. They just were at lunch and recess, and they still look nice, and their hair still looks nice. And when they want to talk, they raise their hand. Most of the boys are spinning around. They've got lunch on their shirt. They got grass stains on their pants. They blurt out the answer and then go raise their hand after they've talked. And there's always the kid that's like touching my shoes while I'm sitting there. And I'm like, please don't touch my shoes. Just leave me alone. Stay focused. Sit still. They really are struggling with that still. By about 2nd, 3rd grade, now you're seeing the kids on this spectrum. And you're going to see the spectrum at the bottom of the slide. It says 0% on one end, 100% on the far side. Our friend Phineas Gage, that I mentioned earlier, he was probably 98th percentile on the positive use of his president before the accident. After the accident, he was about a 0. He lost his entire frontal lobe, and he dramatically changed. Now, if you look at testing, so right here, this would be the average, and this would be at around age 2nd or 3rd grade. You're going to see most of the females on average. So again, you can have females higher, females way lower, but the average female is around 80th percentile, and the average male is about the 50th percentile in terms of using the president. Now, prior to that, during preschool, the girls are moving up that line, and they're getting, on average, to that 80th percentiles. The boys are 1.5 to 2 years behind. One fun, just trivia thing, if you wanted to know what's the most violent age of humans, what age humans commit more acts of aggression compared to all other ages, it's preschoolers. Preschoolers are incredibly violent. They don't control those impulses very well. They have strong emotions, and they react. Now, when puberty hits, all the children are going to slide back down because the frontal lobe is going under massive transformation in puberty. The dopamine levels also, I'm going to talk about that in a second, what's called dopamine. Dopamine levels drop in about half. There's this massive reconstruction of the president. It's being totally remodeled. And so they all drop back down. Around the end of 8th grade, you see a pretty big jump in females in terms of their frontal lobe functioning. So by about spring break of 8th grade, the girls, the young women, they look ready for high school. I saw that with my own daughter. She was ready for high school. She was done with elementary school and middle school and really wanted to be at high school. I just was over it. For boys, it's not till, and I hate to tell you moms this yet, boys, it's not till about halfway through sophomore year before you start to see a little bit more maturity and like saying thank you to mom and for doing those things and actually using deodorant, hopefully, and combing their hair and thinking about the future in college and such. So they're generally about 1.5 to 2 years behind. And that's when you'll see it for boys. So you'll see those development. And again, it takes, the president's not finished For females, it's around 26. For males, it's not till about 28. I will tell you, if you can get your kid to live until they're 25, if they can make it to 25, their chance of living a full life, of living to a standard old age, goes up 300%. Because before that, there's so much impulsive things that happen, and young people die. College kids, high school kids, they do impulsive things in the car, at parties. Every Sunday, Monday morning, read the paper. There's all these stories about stuff over the weekend that happened with teens. So that's a tricky point, but that's how it's going to develop. The reasons why females are there, there's sort of two thoughts on this. First of all, the instructions for building a president are on the X chromosome. So females have 2 X chromosomes, and the brain can actually decide which X chromosome is better, or it could take the best of both and combine them into one super president, which is really amazing. Males have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, so we only have one set of instructions for building a president. Versus females who have 2 sets. So that's the reason you see that difference, and that difference starts when testosterone hits the fetus. I think that's about the first week after conception. If it's an X and Y chromosome, testosterone floods the fetus, and it slows development way down for males. And so males are more subject to learning disabilities, things like that, ADHD. We see 3 to 4 to 1 ADHD between males and females, and that's the reason. The other reason, if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, if you think about males back in the day when were Native Americans living out and were in the plains, and the males are out hunting, they're defending the tribe, they're chasing buffaloes, they're doing wild adventurous stuff, and the premium is to be distractible. So if you're out hunting, you find stuff by movement, noise, you get distracted, you throw your spear, and you're the hero. Females traditionally would have been more taking care of children, taking care of the older people, really keeping an eye on preschoolers. So if it was a bunch of men sitting around the fire, and we're talking, sharpening our spears, and we're in charge of the preschoolers, it wouldn't be long before one of us goes, hey, didn't we have 4 preschoolers sitting here, or weren't there 4? I only count 3, man. And one has just gone down to the stream. You really have to focus taking care of preschoolers. They need attention, and women's brains can do that. So you see girls in school who are really quite focused. Okay, let's take another question. Perfect timing.
All right, this one is from Maria. I have a boy who's 11 and a girl who's 8. My son was very distracted while he was growing up and not at all organized until a few weeks after his 11th birthday, where now he is organized, a little bit of a perfectionist, and I can see that he strives to be better. My daughter was like that until she turned 8. Now she's more sloppy, not organized, and she drives me crazy. Is that normal? And can I expect her to become organized again and conscientious the way her brother changed? Is this only a stage in development?
It is. You hit on a couple phases there. For the boy, most boys are going to hit that kind of 2nd, 3rd grade where they start to get more organized. For my son, it was 4th grade. In 4th grade, he started being a student. I didn't have to remind him all the time about homework. He just took over. It's around 4th grade. And so some kids are a little later. They might be the 5th grader that all of a sudden they kind of get with it. I can remember in 5th grade learning how to backpack, and I had the Boy Scout manual, I had a checklist. First time I ever did a checklist. Now, so it took him a little longer to get to where he is on the spectrum. Where he is now is probably what he's going to be like as an adult. So, and most of this is genetic. So you have to look at mom and dad. If mom and dad have ADHD, there's a much higher chance the kids will, especially boys. But I would guess he's going to look like this as an adult. He is going to go through a portion during puberty where it's all going to slide down. So you're going to see this deteriorate, but most likely he'll be back to where he is now. Probably junior year in high school, I'm guessing. He may not have that bad of a slump, but that would be sort of the typical progression. With your daughter, my guess is that she's going to reclaim that. She's getting closer to that, pre-puberty age. So girls are starting puberty younger and younger, and you see a lot of emotional distractions, which we'll be talking about in a second, but you do see a lot of emotional distractedness. Certainly for girls that age, the whole girl thing and drama with each other, and then focusing on that more than attention to detail and schoolwork. So my guess is she's probably heading into that next phase of development, and she will outgrow it. She most likely is going to come back to where she was when she was younger. So as an adult, she's probably going to be where she is on that spectrum. So typically about for each of your kids, you're probably seeing them where they're going to be, where your daughter was and where your son is, and that's probably how they're going to be when they're adults. Thanks, Susie. Finally, next slide, quick. We'll keep rocking and rolling. The best part, if you want to learn more about just impulse control and why it's important, look up the Stanford Marshmallow Test. It's in the book. It's absolutely hysterical. I role play it with children, with little kindergartners. We do it, but it's about the ability to control your impulse. And they had an experiment where they offered these preschoolers a marshmallow, and they said, now if you don't eat it for 10 minutes, I'll give you 4 more. And as you might guess, there were some children who ate their marshmallow immediately. They couldn't control their impulses. There was a second group that tried to wait. They're the funniest because they're just obsessed with the marshmallow. They're picking it, they're touching it, they're licking it. And after 7 minutes, they ate it. And then there was the third group of children who waited and got the extra marshmallows. They followed those children through their life. They're my age now. But they followed them at say at high school, young adulthood. The kids who could wait, the waiters, had far more better life outcomes, whether that's income, a happy family life, education, job status, health, than the kids who waited right away. And the kids who tried to wait and couldn't were in the middle. At my age now, they're finding that the waiters, the kids who can wait, have far better health. They're better fitness, less heart disease, less obesity, less diabetes, where the group who ate it right away were really suffering in those categories. So check out the Stanford Marshmallow Test. Kids always enjoy it. I'm sure you could watch an online version of it. Now, next slide, we're going to talk about dopamine quick. Dopamine is one of the 4 major neurotransmitters. I was talking about brain cells earlier. But basically, I'll show you real quick. This is going to be an arm from one brain cell, and it wants to communicate with this brain cell over here. Now, there's a little gap between these things called dendrites. And the way the brain communicates is it sends an electrical charge down the arm to the end of one of the dendrites. And when it hits there, it sends a neurochemical across this little synapse, which is fluid, and it docks here, and it unloads an electron, which causes an electrical signal to go down that arm, and it carries a message. In the frontal lobe, the big player is dopamine. Dopamine is the neurochemical that goes back and forth. I use a kayak analogy in the book. Now, dopamine's produced in the midbrain, starts there. You can see that arrow. It runs through the pleasure system, and that's really important today and when we look at next week. And when it hits the pleasure system, your feelings of pleasure go up, and you feel great. And then it goes up to the president. And when it hits the president in just the right amount, it does the executive functions. It gives good self-control. You can control your movements. Everything's in perfect harmony. The amygdala is something we will look at next week for sure, and how action video games trigger the amygdala. So if you turn to the next slide, please. So the messages up to the president, when the system's right, the messages from dopamine say focus, don't forget to write the name on the paper, ignore distractions. When it's going through the pleasure system, it's saying, wow, I like this. I want to keep doing it again. So if we look at our student here who's writing and really seems to be relaxed and enjoying what she's writing about. She's reading and writing on paper and seems to be feeling pleasure, and she's nice and focused. Looks like she's got great penmanship. Her president's working. Now, if we look at all of us, so at nighttime, your dopamine levels go down at night. They don't switch off totally or you would die. Everything would shut off. So they do go down. And in the morning, they start to rise. Now, some of us are early risers. Our dopamine levels go up right away. Others of us are not, and you need a cup of coffee to get you going. And coffee does increase your dopamine levels about 4 times. So When it's not enough dopamine, you're under aroused. So you're not focused, you can't pay attention, you don't have very good impulse control. You're a bit of a couch potato. You're not really feeling, you're just bored. And you had a lot of boredom during the pandemic. We did at our house with the children, not us. My wife and I were too busy, but I'm sure you had boredom at home. Now, as the dopamine levels go up into that green, dark green area, that's where then you see the president is on and it's working. Now, if you like a subject or you like the teacher, your dopamine levels are going to go a little bit higher because it's more pleasurable. And so even on the way, I want you to all think back to middle school or elementary school, a teacher you had, or you're going to middle school and you're going to remember a class you used to go to that you just loved, or a teacher that you just loved. Just walking down the hallway to that class, your dopamine levels will start to go up because you enjoy it. And at that point, you're going to have better focus. You're going to be a little higher on the focus. Now, I want to take another example, would be chocolate. So I don't see Zuzu right now, but I do see Sydney. So I'm going to tempt Sydney. And let's say I said, you know, we're in person and I pulled out a box and I said, Sydney, I have some incredible Belgian chocolates. My buddy Philippe just got back. He gave me these. Would you like one? Now, when I do that in an audience, and I can see Sydney shaking her head and her eyes glowing. When I do this in an audience, you can tell who loves chocolate immediately because their eyes just glow. Just the thought of that chocolate is just overwhelming. Now, once I gave you the chocolate, or I gave Sydney the chocolate, if it indeed was incredible, her dopamine levels are going to go even a little bit higher up into this lighter green area. And she's going to be like, whoa, that was so good. And then her next thought is, I want another one. Now, if she's not too high in the hyperfocus zone, the impulse control will still be there. And she'll say, no, I shouldn't. I'm working on the calories. I'll just have one because I promised myself I'd give that up during the pandemic. And she'd restrain herself. Now, let's say she's really feeling very excited about it. And I happen to put the box there next to her desk in the lecture. There's a chance you might think about snitching an extra chocolate because it's such a dopamine rush. Now, the one thing, if any of you have middle schooler, young high schoolers, the whole puberty thing, the kids go through this phase where they just chow down on carbs. And they often put on that extra weight and they're just chowing on carbs. And they're just like get addicted to it. They just can't control themselves with Cheetos or all this other snack food and candies and junk. Typically that will go away, but all kids will go through that phase. So we're going to see that up and down throughout the day, and at nighttime it's going to decrease as you fall asleep. Now on Julie's thing about her daughter, so certain things, let's pick a good one. So if I want to go to Orange Theory, I like Orange Theory. If I want to go meditate, I do breath work, the Wim Hof breath method, any of those things. I really get focused and I get into this hyper-focus zone where I'm just thinking about that. And when your brain only thinks about one thing, it relaxes. It's great for your brain. So doing one thing, single-mindedness, is wonderful for the brain. Now, when it gets up into that hyper-focus zone, if it's not too low, but for all of us when we're in single-mindedness, we're doing something we enjoy. It could be golf for me. People making puzzles through the pandemic, jigsaw puzzles, for hours on end. You don't lose all your other functions. You still, in the back of your mind, you're going, yeah, this is great, but I do need to remember to go to the grocery store and I have to pick up that one thing, and oh, we got to sign that permission slip. So you're still going to have some of these other functions, including time management. Like, well, I think I've been doing my breath work about 20 minutes, and I think I've got another appointment. I better stop now. If it goes higher than that, then you really see the other executive functions shut off and impulse control shut off. And this is where the gaming, and we'll talk about it next week, I'll show you a slide of it, but this is where Julie's daughter is getting lost because the time management is an executive function. And when kids are on social media or gaming or any of that stuff, their dopamine levels get so high, they just lose all other perspective. All they can think about is focus, focus, focus. Do this, do this, do this, and that's it. So we'll talk about that some more next week. Susie.
All right, Craig, you are hitting a lot of nerves. We've got some good questions, two of them. One is from Margaret, who says, at what age for boys can we expect to talk about executive function and they can understand their own difficulties? So I'll let you answer that one first, and then we have another one about a boy.
Yeah. Oh, I talked with preschoolers about it. I read Clark the Shark to them, and Clark's the Shark who struggles with focus and self-control. And then kindergartners, we talk about the president. I introduce them the concept of their president, and how some children, it's a little harder for some children to use their president than others. First and second grade, we read David Goes to School. And we talk about how, David has a hard time, but other kids don't. Like you can see one of the girls who's sitting, perfectly. One of the boys is paying attention in the library. And then I'll talk to the kids about, some children really it's easy for them to use their president. It works really well. Other children in the middle, some children have a hard time. So you don't necessarily have to point out the gender differences at that age, but usually kids know it. I knew in first grade that the girls sat still better than us boys. And we were always in trouble. And if you look at the research, boys get like four to five times the disciplinary referrals than girls. We just don't have it. But it's up to you what time you want to introduce the gender thing. But it's never too young to start talking about, hey, let's use our president. And of course, I always talk about the good qualities. We need people who are action-oriented, who sometimes are impulsive. We need that as a society. We can't have everybody with perfect frontal lobe function. We need all kinds of people in the world. Second question?
Yep, thank you. The next question is, my 9-year-old boy steals candies from the pantry and hides wrappers under pillows and areas all over the house. When candies were taken away, he starts stealing straight from the sugar bowl. How do I help him and fix this problem?
Yeah, that is a tough one. And typically kids will go through a stealing phase at some point in development. And typically, anything under 6 weeks, it's just a phase. If it goes over 6 weeks, you've probably got a habit. I did have a kid once I saw years ago who was really into the sugar thing, like your son. And he would actually take the sugar packets by the coffee machine in my office, and we'd sneak in and we'd just down these sugar packets. It was incredible. So I would try to come up what you want to. He needs more structure. And you're going to have to say, honey, we can't have this stealing. So one thing, you're probably going to have to lock up the sugars and the chocolates. So you're going to have to find a way that he can't get to it. And it's no difference than when I was in the fraternity house, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, the football players, after partying all night, would raid the refrigerator and eat everything. And we would have no food for the week. Well, we had to put locks on the freezer to save our food. We could talk about brotherhood and trust, but that didn't work. Eventually, we had to get 2 locks because they were big enough to break it open. So you're probably going to have to limit the sugar stuff. I would not have unlimited amounts of sugary drinks and all these different things. I'd have those limited. Then you could talk to him about, we could have a specific time that he could have a designated amount of sugar, some candy or something, or a beverage, if he stays with the rules of not sneaking it and not hiding the wrappers, but really stays with the rules. And try to reinforce it that way, because he totally is probably not going to be able to stop totally. But I would just try to see if you can't, kind of from a behavior management standpoint, limit the intake and have a positive system for him to be able to earn that. I am getting all sorts of strange stuff on my screen. Sydney, do you know, could that be coming from my end?
We see your screen just fine.
You do? Okay, so it's bouncing all over the place here. Okay, I just want to make sense. So Sydney, if you can't see it, then wave or shake or something. But it's like anything else and the quantity in terms of where you store stuff. I tell parents of teenagers, if you consume alcohol, marijuana products, buy small quantities. Don't have huge quantities at your house open. They're going to seal it. So some part of that means having some restrictions for the child or the whole family. We don't have too much of this stuff, and then trying to have a behavior system. And I'd use a positive reinforcement system for him. So I'd have some stickers or just check marks at his age that he could earn something special if he's able to control his impulses. And just talk to him about it. And I would also talk to him about how that's so hard with the sweets for him. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. I want to get cranked along here. We're going to go to the second area of the brain, and that is what I call the factory. Now, the factory is your limbic system, and it's where your emotions come from. And I like the analogy of a factory because you can just see it cranking up and just smoke filling out of smokestacks, and your feelings are fired up. And for the first thing is we're going to talk about your child's temperament. So, Sydney, if you'll do the next slide. And the emotional system, it basically surrounds the brainstem. It surrounds the brainstem. It's like a donut-shaped thing. Now, all children have a basic temperament, and I developed this tale years ago to highlight how that works. And it uses the Winnie the Pooh characters. I wasn't able to put them in the book because I wrote a letter to Disney asking permission, but they said no, I couldn't. But I believe I could do it on a lecture, but I just couldn't do it in the book. But we're going to say that the Winnie the Pooh characters decide to go for a walk in the forest. Now, first to go is Winnie the Pooh. And Winnie the Pooh is a very happy fellow. He's about an 8 out of 10 in terms of happiness. And the Pooh walks along and he trips over a rock and he falls down and he gets a little scuffed up. What does Winnie the Pooh say? Well, if you remember the show, he stands up, he brushes off, and he says, "Oh, bother, but I think I might find honey in a tree." So if you look at the graph, Winnie the Pooh's happy. His happiness goes down when something happens, but he doesn't have a huge reaction. He just says, "Oh, bother," and his happiness comes back up, and he goes along on the walk happily looking for honey. So he's thinking about positive things. So Winnie the Pooh is the kind of child that can hold on to their happiness when stuff happens. When life happens, they can stay pretty much Winnie the Pooh. Piglet's about a 6. Piglet's pretty happy. Piglet is consumed with anxiety, so that's the little pink one. And so Piglet goes on the walk, and he trips over the rock, and he says, "Oh no, I can't go on a walk. Walks are dangerous. I could get hurt. Walks are very frightening. I have to go home." And he'd be consumed with anxiety, would have to go back to his little house before he could reclaim his happiness. So some of you have children with anxious temperaments, and they get anxious easier than other children and have a harder time letting go of it. Next, we have Rabbit goes on the walk. Rabbit's only about a 6. Rabbit's not the happiest fellow, or no, 4. Rabbit's about a 4. And Rabbit goes and he trips over the rock and he says, "Stupid rocks, not even rocks won't be my friend." And he's angry and upset. And he storms down the rest of the walk. And every time he sees a rock, he says, "There's a rock that isn't my friend." And he kicks at it and throws it, and he's all upset. Until finally he gets back to his rabbit hole and he has some tea and he calms down. Then our friend Eeyore comes along, who's about a 2. Eeyore has melancholia, which is a 4th grade spelling word at St. Anne's. And Eeyore falls over the rock and he says, "Even the rocks don't want to be my friend. Nobody wants to be my friend." And he walks along and he's sad. And every time he sees a rock, he says, "There's another rock that doesn't want to see my friend." And on it goes until he finally gets back. And Pooh comes up and he says, but Eeyore, I'm your friend." And Eeyore says, "Yes, but no one wants to be my friend." So Eeyore's the sad child. He gets sad easier and has a hard time letting it go. And then finally, Tigger goes on the walk. Tigger's a 10 out of 10. And Tigger falls over the rock and he says, "That was great. I want to do it again." And he purposely goes back, throws himself over the rock, gets bloody and bruised, and it's getting dark, and he's all scratched up, and he says, "I better get home. That's the best walk I've ever been on in my life." So he's that excited child, which approaches everything with excitement. Now, all kids, and Owl, by the way, Owl was the interesting one because Owl is sort of emotional. We'll talk about that in the next part of the brain. He probably fits sort of in the autism spectrum range. So Owl would go, "That's highly interesting. I wonder where this rock got here. I think I'll study it, and then I'll do a PowerPoint presentation for my friends to see." So Owl is very professorial and doesn't really share a great deal of emotion. So all of your children are going to have a temperament they default to when they're stressed. So obviously your kids experience all these emotions throughout the day. Your emotions happen all the time. In English, we have somewhere around 330 emotions. All people around the world experience 7 basic emotions. Those were all in that movie from Disney a couple years back. Inside Out has all the emotions. Fabulous, fabulous movie. But everybody, even though we're happy, when we're stressed, we tend to default to 1 or 2 of these. So I would start with myself. This is a fun activity. My book has activities for the whole family. Every chapter has an activity. On this one, you sit down with your family and you talk about your temperaments and what happens to you when you're stressed. And I always start with myself with the kids, and I say, I'm pretty much 80% Winnie the Pooh, but I have some piglet in me. And I can get kind of worried. And I know when my wife says, honey, maybe you should go for a bike ride, that she can tell before I'm not even aware of it yet. And she knows I'm getting stressed and I'm getting anxious and I need to do something about it, go for a bike ride. So I have about 20%. I did pick up some EOR when Columbine High School happened. My office was down the street and I was a first responder, mental health responder. We were a safe shelter for hundreds of kids that afternoon. And I really picked up some EOR. So you can also get it through trauma or life experiences, but all your kids have a different temperament. And later on this, I'll give you some tips on how to handle different temperaments. Now, in addition, if we go to the next slide, some of your kids are quick reactors and some don't react as quick. I can't tell if the next slide's up, Sydney. My computer is just going wild. If I check out, it's because I had a seizure from this thing. Okay, a basketball analogy, and hopefully you can see me because it's like wild. So for some kids, I want you to think of basketball, and the ball, they're coming down the court with the ball. It's on a fast break, so a team stole the ball, and here's the other team trying to stop it. Now, your 4-year-olds are very emotional. They have very intense emotional systems, and they're very reactive. So you got 4 players coming down the court with the ball, and there's like one defender, and he's the short guy named Bob. And because it's preschool, they don't have much of a president. And Bob's looking at the popcorn vendor in the stands, and they're going to score every time. So whenever you go to the King Soopers or the Safeway, and the preschooler wants the cookie, and the mom says no, the kid has a bloody fit, or they won't sit down on the cart. Then they start crying, and you see it all the time. That's the basketball analogy for a preschool. As your child gets older, around mid-elementary school, actually about the first, second grade, their emotions dampen in about half. So now they have 2 emotions coming down the court, and not quite as fast. They're not as reactive, unless your child has some reactive tendencies, but they're coming down the court with the ball. And now they have a couple players on defense. And they know rules, like they know you get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. Or if you get too emotional over small things, the kids will call you a crybaby, which they still do. That was big when I was a kid, and it still is. So they have a better chance of stopping those emotions. So you see some emotional maturity in those elementary years. It really is the golden age of families when your kids are in elementary school. Now, as they get into the teen years, their emotions double. So they have 4 players coming down the court, and they are fast. And their frontal lobe functioning drops in about half because of those changes, decreased dopamine levels, and the brain's reorganizing. And so it often is a slam dunk again, where they're happy 1 minute, excited 1 minute, and they're mad and upset the next. And fortunately, as they get older, they get more defense. Around mid-30s, your emotions tend to dampen. People aren't as hot-headed, or all that jealousy and stuff goes down. And then in your 60s, basically, 1 or 2 emotions and plenty of defense. That's how it's supposed to be. You don't hear about too many people older who commit crimes of passion unless they've had a history of that. If you do read about older with criminal behaviors, they've had a long history of impulsiveness and not being able to stop your emotions. But you're supposed to see greater self-control as you get older. Then finally, the teen brain, our next slide. This is a picture of the teen who has twice the emotions, and that's due to the teen hormone levels. So we'll click over to boys first. The big driver for boys in terms of their maturity, when they hit puberty, you see a 20-fold increase in testosterone. And testosterone shoots straight up. And during that time, I talk with 6th grade boys every year at St. Anne's. We talk about how when this happens, you develop urges. There are certain urges you didn't feel as a kid, but now as a young man, you start to feel, and as a man, you will feel. And those urges are obviously sexual urges. You also get more intense feelings, this intensity. And so their emotions just crank up. One of my graduate students, she drew the original graph for this, and said to her, I said, it doesn't drop quite that much when you're an adult. If your testosterone, if you're a man, if they drop too quick, you should see your doctor. But it's not quite that big of a slope. But you got to love those testosterone commercials on TV. So you get this intensity with males and these urges that they have to learn to control. I had one woman at one of the lectures, she said, to her question, well, how do men learn to control it? And this man sitting by her said, we just do. Like, it's so hard. He said, we just have to learn. I had a varsity coach at Mullen one year at my conference. And he said the hardest thing for him as a tennis coach is to teach these young men not to just smash the ball, because they're just full of this aggression. And when the ball comes, they just want to just slam it every time. And he said, I have to coach them and coach them on, you don't just slam it, you set the guy up, then you slam it. But he said that was his hardest part of coaching. And for the females, on the next slide, a lot of females' emotional system, especially for your teenagers, it's related to the menstrual cycle. The first 2 weeks of the cycle, estrogen levels are high. Females do better in sports. They do better academically during those first 2 weeks. They're also more verbal. There's all sorts of research on this. They're more focused. They do better on tests, school tests. And then when ovulation hits, progesterone starts to go up, estrogen goes down, and you see a decline in terms of emotional sensitivity, or increased emotional sensitivity, a decrease in performance, and then the final week where things are just really sort of difficult. And my 15-year-old is more than happy to tell me when she's having her cycle and what part she's in, and I need to be more sensitive as a dad. So I'm working on that. But my wife came up with the two-day rule, and she was working with smart girls. She did some training for smart girls, develop their curriculum. And it's that for teenage girls, if it's in your, like the 4th week of your cycle, and you have a big decision to make, wait a couple days. Don't make it right away. Give it 2 or 3 days, because you might regret it afterwards because of where you are emotionally. Now, that doesn't mean for males and females we can't control our emotions, or that we're not the masters of our ship, but we are, humans are very much influenced by our hormones. You can read the male brain or the female brain, blanking on the author, but it's pretty amazing how much those impact us. Other emotions that your teenagers are going to experience are after puberty. You're going to see increased oxytocin levels. Oxytocin is that the feel-good cuddle hormone, you know, bonding and attachment. One enzyme on the way for males is vasopressin. It's one enzyme different than oxytocin. And for males, it's also involved physical contact, but also wanting to take care of, like be in charge and help people and take care of business. And as a young man, you want to protect your family. My next door neighbor just had their first baby, and I looked at him and I said, man, your vasopressin levels are skyrocketing right now, because he wants to take care of his family. But those hormones are the reason why if you've got a teenager in love or been dating someone, I can remember this with my older one, where they would spend 2 hours just like cuddled up on the couch. And you're like, okay, and just talking and smiling and for hours. And then I'm thinking, man, I'd go nuts. I'd have to go ride a bike and watch sports or something. But that's what's going on for them emotionally. And then also next week, we'll talk about cortisol, their cortisol levels going up. Now, with all that emotional intensity, it does affect the third area of the brain we're going to talk about. So we do the next slide. So we're going to look at this fellow on the left. This is the person who's feeling calm. Now, if you didn't show this picture on the right, the angry man, and you were showing these pictures to children, teenagers, and adults. The child, when you showed them this picture on the left, and there's research where they did this, the child or the adult would say, he doesn't really seem to feel very much. I don't think he feels too much. If you ask a teenager, what's that fellow feel? They say he's angry, he's mad. And the intensity of their emotions makes them perceive others as more angry than they actually are. So they get much more intense about stuff. And those of you who are listening right now, we have teenagers. You've heard your kids say to you, stop yelling at me. And you're like, I'm not, honey. I just asked you to pick, to turn off your lights in your room, remember? You're yelling at me again. You're like, no, honey, I was just talking about the lights. Why are you always mad at me? And they will just go on and on to stop yelling. Why are you so mad? And you're like, I'm not. I just wanted to ask a simple question. So if you've had teens, you've been there, you've done that. But that'll take us to the third area of the brain. And this has to do with the nonverbal processing system. So if we can pull that next slide up. Third area of the brain is on the right hemisphere of the brain. And it helps you be a social person. It reads what's called nonverbal communication. The ability to think about people's tone of voice, their facial expressions, their hands expressions, how close they are to you. And the majority of human communication is nonverbal. Not necessarily the words spoken, but how they're spoken. Now, a quick example, and I'll ask Sydney to do it, although I can't really see you because the screen is just going wild. But let's say I'm a middle schooler and I'm coming to the classroom, or a high schooler, and I'm looking for a seat. Sydney's going to give me a look like, oh, you could sit by me. And so she just did that, just like me. So her eyes are open, and she's kind of like this. And I could read that and go, oh, she's open for me sitting next to her. That's great. Now she's going to give me one of those looks that says, don't even think about it. And now we got like no, we're not doing this. We're kind of, and the eyes are intense. The eyebrows are narrow. That's all nonverbal saying to me, that's not a good place for me to sit. Now, if you think about your average kid, if they go into a classroom and they have to pick a seat and it's not assigned seating, they have to sit there and they have to think about all these different things about how to pick a seat. And I want you to just think about what you would think about. We in person, we brainstorm this out loud, but you might think about, where's a friend? You might think about, did I do my homework? I didn't, so I think I'll sit in the back. All the teachers know that. I need to be the teacher's pet because my grades are right on the margin. So I'm going to sit in front and really show the teacher that I'm interested in her class. Or to get those extra points, I want to raise my hand. I have a hard time seeing the board. I have a hard time hearing. I should sit closer. I should look for who the bully is. Maybe I should stay away from the bully. I also should think about who the most popular kids are and who sits with who. So if there's two girls that always sit next to each other and one of them's not there yet and I sit down in her seat, that other girl's going to look at me and going, what are you doing? Because I wasn't remembering their best friends. So I have to think about the hierarchy, the popularity in the class. All these things come together in split seconds when the teacher says, everybody sit down. Now, some people do that super fast. They're very social. So if you look on the spectrum of mirror processing, you've got your social butterflies, and people are more socially awkward. And the social butterflies collect that information super fast, and they figure out exactly where they should sit to be the perfect spot for them and those around them. So they're being a good social person. Other people that are further down the spectrum don't pick up as much. I love a stained glass window analogy. Social people, before they decide something socially, they observe and they paint together this huge stained glass picture of how they should act and what's going on in the room. And they collect a lot of different pieces of glass to make their picture. Less social people only see, I just needed a seat. I'm going to look for an open seat and I'm going to sit down. And they don't consider all the other ramifications. So when you look at males versus females, first of all, when babies are first born, males and females are very close in this regards. Males will pick up cries of other infants and feels when a child is sad, they will pick that up and they understand it. And females do too. But as children grow, you will see this difference starting to happen. One research study, they put an acting child, it was like 4th and 5th graders, put this actor child out on the playground, and they had him sitting there across the playground looking sad and just sitting by himself. And they wanted to know which gender would notice the child. It was mostly females. So females would go over, girls would go over and ask the boy to join in or see how he was doing. They did figure out a way to get boys to pay attention, and that was they gave the actor a ball. They gave him like a soccer ball or a football. And then the boys noticed, and they would come over and befriend him because we get zeroed in on those play toys a little bit more. But it really changes at puberty, and that's when the difference between a female brain and a male brain really explodes. So the area in the middle of the two hemispheres is like a tube. It holds the two hemispheres together, connects them. And these things are called mirror neurons, which allow you to think about what other people feel. They run through that tube, and that collection of neurons is twice as thick for females after puberty than males. It's also powered by estrogen, so females do it much faster. They pick up on social cues much faster than men do and process it much faster. The country comedian Jeff Foxworthy had a joke about the difference in social processing between men and women is that women have an 8-lane superhighway and men have a 2-lane country road. And that's neurologically pretty much accurate. For children who really struggle with the nonverbal and others' intentions and how to fit in and what other people are thinking and feeling, that would be considered the autism spectrum disorder on the far end. Kind of in the before that, you might have what the kids would say, oh, he's kind of a nerd or a geek, and then or the engineer type. They're a little bit lower on that. And then if you're about 10 percentile lower, you would be in the autism spectrum disorder range. Females around the 76th percentile on average, and males are about the 50th percentile. So I would tell for all of you women out there, if you have a male partner and you're talking to him about something that went on, and you say, well, how do you feel about it? And he gives you that look and he says, fine. He probably is fine. He's not picking up on it, missing out on much of what happened, and doesn't have quite the same acuity or awareness of things as females. From an evolutionary perspective, again, if you think back to taking care of preschoolers, taking care of infants who can't talk, women had to rely much more on nonverbal communication to understand others' emotions, and you all do it more effectively. I'm going to skip ahead time-wise, Sydney, to, if you could go to the teen angst picture. So I'm going to skip, the one I skipped is the orbital cortex, which is like a blender that puts those 3 areas of the brain together. There's a whole section in the book on that. But given time, and I want to get to the strategy section, Aristotle, you'll love this quote. And if you think your teens are different than other teens, Aristotle said, adolescents today are as fickle in their desires as they are vehement in expressing them. That means they change their mind all the time because the presidents aren't working, and they get really intense about stuff. And the formula would be they have half the frontal lobe functioning, twice the emotions, and that nonverbal stuff, it just explodes during puberty. So that part of the brain really starts to grow. And that middle school is a time when you see a lot of this, dominance and trying to be cool, and who's in the group and who's out bullying, picking on others. It is a phase, and it's good for kids to understand that. About 80% of middle schoolers will report feeling bullied in middle school. When you look at high school, it drops to 40%. And if you did the research on college, my guess is it drops to 20%. So you see the brain mature, but socially, middle school is the hardest time because they're learning about sarcasm. They know about sex, and they think they know everything about sex, and they can think of every sexual joke you could ever imagine. And they make fun of changing body parts and all this stuff. And they learn about the world, and they think they know all this stuff, and they really don't. It's a pretty unattractive age. The analogy I like to use from a nonverbal standpoint, if I was to give everybody juggling lessons right now, and I said, okay, we're first-time jugglers, and I'm going to give you sharp steak knives, and let's all stand up and juggle next to each other. A lot of people are going to get hurt. And so when you see this behavior in middle schoolers, I like to remind myself, those are tomorrow's leaders. They're just learning how to do it appropriately. They're learning how to assert themselves well. And you have to appreciate some of that while you also have a hard line on bullying behavior. A couple good movies, if you want to help your kids with the nonverbal stuff. I love Princess Diaries. I think one of the best films ever made, where you see a young woman who really doesn't have very good social skills and then develops them. And for understanding the difference between the two, the movie Spy Kids, the original, where there's the boy and the girl is very social. She uses her social skills to save the day, where her brother uses analytical skills. And we want to appreciate both of those. And all types of brains need to be appreciated. But in terms of the teen, they have that math formula going on. You'll see the little teenagers swirling. That's teen angst. It's one of my vocabulary words for 7th graders. They have to tell me what philosopher came up with the term angst. I'll let you research it. But teenagers tend to, they feel all this intensity and these changing emotions and happy and sad and excited one minute, mad the next. And then they want to have control. And they often do things to have control that relieves their angst, that only brings more. So it could be, I'm just mad at my parents. I'm jumping in my car and I'm just going to go on to 470 and just fly down 470. And I'm feeling so hopped up on testosterone until the siren lights are going off and I get pulled over. Now I don't feel in control anymore. I just got a ticket for going 30 miles over the speed limit, and I know I'm going to lose the car for the next 6 months. Then I'm not so great. Or I run into a tree, I crash, my best friend dies. I've had several losses over my career of students from accidents where they were in control, feeling great, and it didn't work out so well. So it could be smoking cigarettes, or vaping, could be vaping with the friends until you get caught or suspended, or you get popcorn lung. It could be smoking pot, bullying other kids, all sorts of stuff teenagers do to feel relief, but only have more. What you're trying to help your teen do is direct their energy and direct all that intensity into something positive and become a shooting star. And good middle school teachers, who are a very special breed, good high school teachers, good coaches, are really effective. Good arts teachers and musicians, senior musicians, are great at helping young people channel that energy. My other favorite quote, you can look up the philosopher, this one, out of chaos comes a shooting star. And that's what we're hoping for our teenagers. Now we'll turn to the next slide. I want to give you some tips that are in here, and these all just sort of flow from the talk. First of all, the big 4 things you can do for your child's brain: sleep, plenty of sleep, water during the day, protein is your best food, or very complex carbs for brain power, and exercise. They need exercise. Exercise gets your dopamine levels up 4 times, and it lasts much longer than caffeine. Next time we'll talk about why you should limit electronics. And then for the pandemic time, I think the biggest thing as a parent for all of us during this pandemic, the phrase I've been talking about the most is you have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. Meaning you don't know how things are going to go. Right now at Cherry Creek's in school, you heard about how it's not spreading among the kids. That could change 2 weeks from now. They could all be home in 2 weeks. We hope not. I hope St. Anne's doesn't, but it could. So you're talking with your kids, we have to embrace, we don't know the answers, but we'll have contingency plans. We'll set up contingency plans. So in tips of foster develop, this is the whole point, that first one, know your child. Find out, look at all those brain areas, figure out who your child is. Then in the book, there's the child support system that tells you how to address each child. The other thing I would tell you, you always have to remember that the kids want to have control. They want to feel in control. And the older they get, the more control they want to have. And you have to embrace that. The one morning I'll never forget, or it was an evening, and I told my son he was back in his room, and I told him to do his chores or something. And I heard him yell back at me, which was fairly rare. And he yelled back, he said, "Stop telling me what to do." And fortunately, I bit my tongue, which is a really important strategy that's in here. And I wanted to come in yelling and going, "What do you mean, don't tell you what to do? I'm the general, you're not." But I just said, "Excuse me?" He was in 7th grade. I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "I want to do my chores on my own without being told." And I was like, oh my God, we just reached this new level of maturity. And I was like, great, that's fine. We'll do it. That's a deal. From now on, you do your chores on your own. But if they're not done by 8 o'clock, I get to say something. And he agreed. And I don't think we ever got to 8 o'clock. I never had to remind him. If I had overreacted in that situation, it would have been a different story. So you figure out your kid, you give them the structure they need. The pandemic ripped away most of our structure. And so one of the number one advices I had for the last 6 months was you have to have a rhythm to your house. You have to have different things at different times, routines and schedules, but also rules and consequences. The general rule of thumb is the less internal control your child has, the more external control they need. So you have to have more clearly defined rules and consequences and reinforce those at least at 80%. For my daughter's online school, she does it at my office downstairs. We have her get dressed. She rides her bike. She gets here at 7:30. She does her classes. She's done it one day, 3 o'clock the next day. She has so much time to ride home, get to the homework. We've made it just like school. We didn't want her just sitting around the house in the bedroom in her PJs all day, which is what happened last spring at our house, and that was not fun. Also, if your kid is more impulsive, parents need to be on the same page. There's plenty of children who have good presidents. They don't need parents to be on the same page. You can have different rules with them, and mom and dad, it's just fine. But parents, for kids who are more impulsive, you really need to be on the same page. Always discuss risk. There's so many risks for your kids' behavior, especially teens. I do a whole 8th grade class on drugs, alcohol, sexuality, teen things, and I always talk about you have to understand the risk of what you're getting into. Also, picking the right friends. The good friends will talk you out of the risks. Not good friends will not keep you from doing something stupid. Slow down. Best advice for teenagers is slow down before you make a choice. If Romeo had just waited, so when he thought Juliet was died, if he had called his buddy Bob up and said, "Hey, let's chat. I need some support," he wouldn't have killed himself, and Juliet would have woken up, and they would have probably dated and then broken up. But he was impulsive. So it's getting teens to slow down, and always talk to teens about what other adults could they reach out to. So hopefully they can reach out to you. Many times they won't. What other parents can they reach out to? Who could you get help from? Accountability and insight. There's 2 functions of behavior management, of discipline. One of those is to start a behavior. The other is to stop a behavior. Start doing your homework and stop picking on your brother or sister. The other part of discipline is to build insight, to help your kid be more insightful about who they are, why did they do it, what were they feeling. I like the half double rule for that. So if your child misbehaves, you have consequence for them. Later on, when they're calm, if they can talk to you about it in a calm way, and they take ownership, they take responsibility, they realize how it made others feel in the family or why they did what they did, you cut the consequence in half. If they refuse or don't, or they blame it on someone else, then you double the consequence. Social emotional goals. I'm a big believer all kids have social emotional goals to keep being the best person they can be. Positive messages. If you really want to motivate children, 80% of your interactions should be positive and only 20% negative. And that was research done on 5th grade ADHD boys, which was how do you motivate them to be different and have better self-control. And it was 80% of the time positive, only 20% using negatives for consequences. Emotional sharing time is a huge component to helping your child emotionally and socially. Some of your kids will just open right up for you. My daughter has no problems talking. More of the time I'm like, okay, we're probably done with that now. It's time for bed. Let's stop. My son was totally different. So if you have one that isn't really into talking, I like the idea of fly fishing for feelings. You're just throwing little things out like, oh, I heard you had a different sitting arrangement today, or oh, I heard somebody wasn't in school or something. And you just throw little things out and seeing if they'll bite on it. And then as kids talk to you, you want to help them paint a bigger picture of what's going on. And the book, the last chapters have a ton of different analogies that I use with kids. Also, emotional sharing time should be intentional. It's really making and dedicating the time. I think the biggest thing that has changed in the last 20 years, I see so many of the younger parents, and I don't want to parent shame, but a lot of them are on the phones when they're with their children. And you really need to be intentional about connecting with your child emotionally. I don't know any parent, I don't think any parent is ever going to reach their deathbed and say, I wish I had spent more time on my phone. That's not going to happen. So it is being intentional about your connection. Emotions with COVID, we've gone through, it was first anxiety, then lots of feelings of loss, then anger, and more lately, some more depression here at the office and among the kids I work with. I think being back to school is really invigorating us to feel more resilient that we can carry on. Number 8, promote independence, bite your tongue. I mentioned that earlier. Big believer in free play, getting our kids outdoors as much as they can, especially now that we're a little freer. Really want to encourage kids to make mistakes and learn to solve problems on their own. They can't do that if you're always jumping in. So promote making mistakes, promote risk taking. I do like to have a formula. I have a couple of formulas in the book for how to talk to kids about problems and help them strategize. My favorite 2, rituals and adventures. Rituals are things you do over and over as a family that bind you together and they keep track of time. It could be, getting a tree at Christmas, a certain family vacation. Now we've tied in one, which is community service in our family through our church for people with mental health disorders. These are mostly homeless people. And we do it every month. We haven't for the last 6 months. And last night, we actually took Kentucky Fried Chicken downtown to one of the boarding homes where about 30 of our guests live in very impoverished conditions. And my daughter came along and we served, with the other volunteers, we served them our 35th anniversary dinner of the program. And it's the first time we left our church to go do it downtown. And it's just such an amazing ritual in our family to do that every month. And it means so much to my daughter. Adventures, get out on adventures with your kids. And the adventure mindset means when plan A doesn't work, stay relaxed and go for plan B. Some of the best times you'll have with your children is when you're on to plan B and you're just finding something new. One of my favorite stories was trying to get to the DMV on a Friday afternoon with my teenage son to get his license plates for his new pickup truck that he bought used with his own money. And the first two we went to, they didn't do license plates. They were ready to go all the way across town. We spent 2 hours in traffic and I was all frustrated until I remembered, wait a minute, I'm spending 2 hours with my son just together. And we're just talking and listening to music together. And I won't have that opportunity very long. And the one thing I tell you is having older kids, the time goes fast. The older your kids get, the faster your time goes. So you never wish a moment away. But in regards to rituals and adventures, the one thing I want you to think about today, they do help you get through the hard times. They really do. But I want you to think about this pandemic. So at the beginning of the pandemic, people were all talking about how families were experiencing togetherness, their lives were slowing down, there weren't sports practices, people were taking up new hobbies, all these great benefits to families. Now, some of that wore away as the time went on. But I want you to think about one thing from this pandemic that you would like to keep in your family. Pick one thing that you changed in your family that you don't want that to go away and you want to keep it. And then finally, this is related to that community service, is make your empathy a verb. The whole goal of this book is to help kids feel more empathy for each other and your family to have empathy for each other, help children with empathy. And we want to put that to use and have community service. With that, the next 3 slides were on the child support system. Those are in the thing. But I want to mention next week we will be doing the electronics and how they impact the brain. And Zuzu, I can't see you or anything, but if maybe we could, if there's more questions coming in, we could take some time next week to entertain some of those questions as well. Oh, and I promised with temperaments, one tip, if your child has more of that, let's say they're more anxious, and you will see that with your high-performing kids. You get a lot of high-performing kids with a lot of anxiety. When your kid has an emotion, and it could be anger or sadness too, but let's say they're anxious about something. If you offer them a solution and they say, hey, that's a great idea, Mom, thanks, or Dad, thank you, I'll try that. You're set. Now, if you offer a solution and then they say, no, but that won't work because this might happen. Well, you could offer another solution. But if they keep saying but, you want to stop the solutions. And then you want to go to what's called focusing on the process. And rather than answering the question with a solution, you say, oh, I think Piglet came back. Is that the Piglet feelings you have? That's your anxiety, remember? Remember how we talked about you're a little more anxious just like I am? I think right now, let's focus on taking some deep breaths. Let's do some of our breath work we've been practicing. Before we keep talking about solutions, let's do some more breath work. So you really want to address the emotional state, not necessarily what the issue is, because you're never going to get to the issue if they're all emotional. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. Our website is on there. We also have another name for the website. It's you can get to it through welistentokids.com. And thank you for tuning in today. I hope the last part wasn't too frenetic, but my screen is just all over the place. So Zuzu, thank you very much for having me. I hope it came up crystal and clear.
Thank you so much, Craig. Yes, everything on our end was visible and seamless. Thank you, Sydney, for helping Craig. I took pages of notes and just laughed at different points where you just nailed it on the head. My kids are now in their 20s, but
Yeah.
boy, did it bring back the different periods of time that I must say I'm not too sad are behind us, and now we've moved on to other
Yeah.
issues.
And boy, you do. We have kids age 44, 33, 26, and 15, and two grandkids, infant and a 5-year-old who's starting kindergarten, and she needs to go to kindergarten for sure. She's tired of this being at home. But you do see all phases of life, and as they get older, and it's all pretty magical.
The brain is an amazing thing.
Yeah, it is.
So
All right,
I don't see that we have any questions
Okay.
right now. I will just remind people that if you found value in this great presentation from Craig, to feel free to look at it again starting tomorrow on the PIN website, pinccsd.org. And you can pass it on to other people. You can refer back to it. If there was a great slide that you wanted to look at. Now, in the past, we used to have just podcasts, the audio, and now we have the video. And so you get the benefit of looking at this again and referring for yourself back to some information, or looking at having your kids look at it even. So next Tuesday night, get some popcorn, grab a little drink, and have your kids join in and learn about how the teen brain changes and reacts to gaming issues. I see.
And we will start on a positive. Why gaming and social media is good for you. We'll start with that.
Good, that's good. So your kids will be happy that they came. They might be nudging you saying, listen, Mom, see?
They probably will until we get to the second half.
But you'll bring them in.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
Greg, we do have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
Particularly about next Tuesday night. Will it be good for as young as 7 and 9-year-olds?
I think so. The 7-year-old might get a little bored. I mean, if we were in person, they'd be on the stage, which really is fun. So when I do this at live, we have the kids come on the stage and they act out the brain. We are Sydney's producing like a cartoon representation of that, which should be fun for them to watch. They might get a little bored after a while, but I think that's a fine age for it. We will address social media too, and some of the stuff the older kids are doing, but I think that'd be fine.
So if you are dealing with any sexting stuff or something that might be inappropriate.
I will be. Yeah, so that was the one thing. So I have done talks. I've done like just middle school kids and their parents, high school kids, and we're able to be a little more graphic about some of that. So certainly when we get to the social media, that's usually at the end. So if you have younger children and you want to say, oh, why don't you, it's time for bed, whatever, then that might be appropriate. But I'll try to be very cautious about how we talk about those adult topics.
Maybe you could even, for next week, just have a little heads up. Oh, all right. Thanks for all you younger kids.
Yes, perfect.
And you can kind of give that as a little reminder for parents to go ahead and kiss those younger kids goodnight, or send them out, and then so that we make sure that what's appropriate.
That's perfect. I just wrote it down. I will do that.
We have another question. My 9-year-old boy is much like the teenager with angst. Is this a product of early puberty, and is this normal?
If it's been that way his whole life, that's more of a temperament issue. So the kids who have a little more anxiety, sometimes it could come across with the Eeyore bit, and they're pretty cerebral. So they're kind of those deep thinkers, and they tend to go a little too deep. So I like to point out with the kids I work with or whatever is, hey, going deep and thinking about things is useful because you can think of solutions. But once you've got a solution, then why keep thinking about it? Let's just move on. Once we have a plan, that's what all of us have to do right now. We had to develop contingency plans for school. We didn't know when my daughter was starting school until 2 days before that she was going to be online. So you make a plan and then you work on let it go. So that's probably at 9. If he's been that way, that's probably more temperamental, and he's just sort of a deep thinker, angsty kind of guy, and will need help with learning when to let it go, or when's enough is enough, and it's probably not going to help to keep thinking about it. The Dalai Lama had a great quote, which is, he said, anxiety is a useless emotion. If you can do something about it, do it. If you can't do anything about it, what's the point of being anxious? Which I like, although the first function of anxiety is to get us to think. Like, okay, let's be safe. What can I do? My guess is that's more temperamental. Unless it came on, it probably got worse during the pandemic. So all the natural temperaments your kids have just got, and you too as parents, we all have temperaments. They just got blown out through the pandemic. Now, forgiveness in your family is important. My daughter, one night last spring, when I found out she hadn't done her social studies, she was ghosting the social studies class. I just got unglued. And the next morning I went in to say, honey, I'm sorry I yelled last night. And she looked at me, she said, it's okay, Dad. It's the COVID thing. We're all stressed. I'm like, thank you, honey. I appreciate being forgiven. Any other questions?
Hang on. My 9-year-old son has been identified as twice exceptional.
Yeah.
We are really having a hard time explaining to him impulse control and controlling his temper.
Yeah.
However, he's really bright and thinks in a 12-year-old level, maybe older. How do I appeal to him intellectually, but so he understands it on an emotional level?
Yeah, well, so one of the things, I see quite a few twice exceptional kids, and you often see that sort of cognitive abilities with lower presidential functioning. And the analogy I use, if you think about, think about that Bellagio show in Vegas, where the lights and the water fountains choreographed to music, right? That's spectacular. So that's your exceptional student. It's the Bellagio water show. Well, that takes quite a computer to control that thing. And they may have, like the president, that's a really intro computer trying to control the Bellagio water show, and it doesn't match up. And so you often see they might have a normal or a little less than normal president, but they're really intelligent. And so there's this inherent mismatch. For sure, I would be talking to him about using his president. And the reason I like it is it gives kids a name for it. And then we can talk about, and one thing that's fun to do is with kids is Google famous people with ADHD. There's a ton of inventors and scientists and presidents that had ADHD, and they're creative people, but they're not always fun to live with. And so you got to talk about, well, honey, you can let your brain rock and roll over this or that, but here's a family. We all have to be able to get along. The other thing is, just because they can talk like a 17-year-old they still have the emotions of a 9-year-old. So they don't have quite the emotional maturity yet. But I think if you talk to them about their president, and then talk to them about their temperament and how they tend to get angry really quick or argumentative. The other thing with those kids, I'll talk to them all the time, I like to be logical with them and see if I can beat them logically. But one of my favorite research studies looked at, they gave a test to groups of people, adults, and they gave them a multiple choice test, and then they scored them. And then they asked the people, they said, how well do you think you did on the test? And some people said, oh, I think I got an A. That I knew all those answers. I got an A. And then other people said things like, well, I think I got like a B, because some of those questions you could answer more than one way. So I wasn't quite sure. I'm thinking I got a B. Well, then they compared what the people said to what they actually got. And the people that said, I know I got an A, they had like C's. They had B's and C's. The people that said, I think I got a B because there's more than one way to answer, they had A's. And the rule is the smartest people know they're not always right. And I'll say, you know, it's truly people that aren't very smart that think they're right, and they're not. Smart people know they're not. So next time you get all mad and you're arguing about some stupid little thing, you might want to remember that maybe this isn't the right thing to argue about. I did have one of those kids this summer. He came in, his mother's like, oh my gosh, he was supposed to do his instrument practice for 15 minutes, and we got into a 30-minute argument because he swore that it was 13 minutes versus 15 minutes. And I looked at this kid and I said, you just lost 20 minutes of your life arguing over 2 minutes of horn practice. And who on earth would ever say to their kid 13 minutes? That's just absurd. But he was one of those kids that's bright and verbal, and he can just go for it. So there again, you want to confront the process. And just, I said to mom, I said, like, when he starts, just say, we're stopping right now, because you're on one of those things where you're just going to keep arguing me and it's not going to change. So remember, if you want to earn that new computer or you want to have more responsibility, we have to see that you cannot argue, that you can handle not arguing. Does that make sense?
Good, good. Somebody just chimed in and said they had a kid like that.
There's plenty of them.
There are. So we will wind up now. It's 11:30. We are so appreciative, Craig, of the donation of your time, your effort. You and Sydney both joined us to make sure that this new process of PIN going virtual via Zoom is able to continue and be viable. And we are so glad that we benefited so much from what you had to share, and look forward to next Tuesday. So remember that you can find this presentation and the next one, but this one will be available tomorrow, pinccsd.org. The next one will be available the next Wednesday, the same place, and feel free to invite your friends, your neighbors, somebody in another state. So now they can be part of this. If you have a family member who you know needs to hear what Craig has to say. So next month, if you are not able to join us next week, next month we will be meeting October 6th in the morning and October 20th in the evening for an ADHD conversation. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out to us on the pinccsd.org website, and we will see you next Tuesday, same place, same manner. All right, goodbye all. Have a great week.
Thank you.